So thank you, everyone. Okay. And thanks to those of you online, everybody. Yes, it is a very appropriate time to be talking about reverence for life. It's just another example. I mean, we've seen lots of examples lately all over the world. So it's a good time to be talking about reverence for life. This whole month of July, we've been talking about the 5 mindfulness trainings, which are the mindfulness trainings that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote to correlate to the Buddha's 5 precepts, and also to bring it more up to date so that it's more relevant to those of us in the 21st century. And at the end of this month, we will have a special ceremony to transmit those trainings to people who are interested. I'll talk a little more about that later, but first I want to just begin with a little bit of an introduction to this first mindfulness training. Since I took the trainings in 2011 and then began the Inner Being Sangha, I have actually read these trainings every month for 13 years. And that doesn't even include retreats and 5-month mindfulness ceremonies. So probably 200 or more times. But the thing is that every time I read them, I find something either new or insightful. I gain some kind of new understanding. So to me, it's amazing that they always speak to me, and always in a kind of a different way. So sometimes the training feels like an old friend, and I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. But then something will kind of grab my attention. And I think, okay, this is something I could practice with. This is something I could learn to do a little bit better. So there's always something that it's like a living thing. There's always something new in it. And it's also important to remember that these mindfulness trainings are guidelines. They are not a doctrine. In fact, in the 14 mindfulness trainings, which Cornell and I took when we became members of the Order of Inner Being, the very first training has this statement in it, which I love. It says, we are committed to seeing the Buddhist teachings as guiding means that help us develop our understanding and compassion. They are not doctrines to fight, kill, or die for. And the same is true for these 5 mindfulness trainings. They're not doctrines. There are no mindfulness training police. The only person that has anything to do with how you respond to the trainings or how you act in regard to them, that person is you. It has nothing to do with me or anybody else. So they're guidelines. And I've also heard it said that when people navigate, like on the seas, they used to use the North Star as their guiding marker. And so the 5 mindfulness trainings are like that North Star. They are a guide. They are not, you'll never get to the North Star, but you can aim that way. So we probably will never perfect the 5 mindfulness trainings in the way that we behave, but they provide an invaluable guideline for us to live. As June said last week, very, very well, it's a way to live ethically, and she did a great presentation on what ethics are. So I'm not going to reiterate that because she did it so well. I'm not going to try to do it. But basically, it's a way for us all to live in harmony with our neighbors, with ourselves, to live in harmony with your own good intentions, with that kind of better part of you. So I have a pamphlet here for everybody, which will help you in case you can't see the monitor. Oh, great, Alex, just pass these out. And you could show the So the first training is called Reverence for Life. And I don't know, I picked this because who would ever think of killing a hummingbird? You know, it's like when you see animals like this, you see nature, there's no problem with reverence for life. I mean, think about, you know, your own pets. Think about cats and the dogs that we love, the horses that people love. All of these animals you wouldn't think a minute about killing. And so reverence for life not only includes them, it includes all life. And it includes my life and your life. So when we're talking about reverence for life, we want to be cognizant that we're going to be reverent, not only in relation to others, but to ourselves. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why sometimes we're seeing so much aggression against other people, because perhaps these instigators don't really have reverence for themselves. So how could they have reverence for other people? That's just my opinion, but I think it deserves a little bit of thought. So let's look at the first mindfulness training and read it on the screen or in your paper. It begins by saying, and they all begin this way, aware of the suffering caused by something. So in this case, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. So that one's not too hard, I think. That's easy for most of us to agree with. Sure, I want to be compassionate. I want to understand what it means for us to be interrelated to one another, how we are all connected. And so we include people, animals, plants, and minerals, our oceans, the seas, our water, and other forms of minerals. So this one, I think, is not difficult for us to think, well, I agree with that, and I think I could do that. The next sentence is much more challenging for most of us, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So this one says, I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. So that's pretty specific. And most people, when they read this, think, first of all, they think, well, I have to be a vegetarian or a vegan. And perhaps, because otherwise, how would you not kill something? There are so many ways to look at this instead of just that one specific point of view. So lately, I have been thinking that since these trainings are guidelines, perhaps it is that a person who still enjoys eating meat could, now I'm just going to put this out for something to think about. Perhaps someone who really likes to eat meat could take this training with the idea that I'm ready to commit to this as a guideline. And so you would study with it, you would practice with it, and eventually, I really do think you would be guided in a direction that would really, really honor this particular part of it. So in other words, these guidelines are very personal. When I read it, I was already a vegetarian. But then I thought about these other parts, not just supporting any act of killing in the world. Well, I thought, well, how in the world do I do that? I'm just one little bitty person in this world. But there are ways. And what I discovered is that in Texas, for instance, there is an organization that is working toward the elimination of the death penalty. And so every time there is an execution scheduled in Austin, we get a notice about it. And there are some people, like at the Austin Sangha, they actually have a kind of a vigil when there is going to be an execution. And then there are ways to support that group. So that's one of the ways that I discovered I can support or not support an act of killing in my world. In my thinking, that's a very interesting point, I think. I mean, I'll come back to that because the next part of the training kind of speaks to that. So let's look at the next part of it. You have the whole thing in your paper, but I'm just putting pieces of it on the screen. So this is what Ty says about this act of killing. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. So that's a lot of information. But what he's telling us, first of all, is that there are things in someone's life that cause them to see that a harmful action, a killing, some act of that would somehow be of benefit to them. And usually it arises from anger, fear, greed, or intolerance. And then we just have to think about this most recent assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Whether a person agrees with him or not is not the point. The person who shot him probably was either angry or he was afraid. I don't know if greed entered into it, but he was probably intolerant. So these are the kinds of harmful actions that arise from these kinds of thoughts, these kinds of activities in the mind and in the way someone is acting. And those kinds of thoughts come from a place of dualistic and discriminative thinking. So I take that to mean that a person, and because we have this really great example, I think about the man who shot Trump yesterday. It makes sense to me that his thinking was very dualistic, like, I am right, he is wrong, or discriminative in the way that he's thinking that if Trump is allowed to complete his advance, if he's allowed to be elected again, then that would be a terrible experience for the whole world. You know, it's kind of exaggerating, but anyway, I think that the way that Ty has written this is very helpful, because it helps us to see that when we engage in harmful actions or in these kinds of experiences, if we get angry or fearful or greedy in the sense of clinging to something, if we feel that we're being intolerant, we might act out in a way that is very much not in accord with this first mindfulness training. So in order to remedy that, Ty says, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views. And so that transforms violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world. I'm going to pause because there's so much here. Can you go back? I want to pause and allow some time for reflection and anything you might like to add, because it's a really big topic and there are so many things that we could say about it. So what would you like to share about this topic? Yes, Alex?
So my in
Yes.
how is the any circumstance?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'm thinking about some examples, like the example of Thich Nhat Hanh, the example of the Buddha. There is a story about the Buddha who was walking somewhere, and he was confronted by a man who had a string around his neck that had thumbs and fingers. I don't remember the guy's name, but anyway, he was notorious because if people just kind of bothered him even a little bit, he cut off their fingers and strung them around a thing that he wore on his neck. And so he's coming up to the Buddha and he says, "Stop." And the Buddha just looked at him and kept walking. And he said it again, even more forcefully, but the Buddha did not stop. And finally, they got really close, and the guy said something like, "Don't you know who I am?" And the Buddha says, "Yes, stop." Just, like, stop it. And he did. He became one of the Buddha's biggest disciples. So in Thich Nhat Hanh's case, that was an incident, I think, when, one person's anger was confronted by another person's peaceful demeanor. In the case of Ty, he grew up in Vietnam, and even during his early years, Vietnam was ruled by different countries. I think by the time the United States got involved in the Vietnamese War, Vietnam had been under the rulership of China, certainly France. And in fact, the French were the ones that were most adamant about leaving. Anyway, he grew up with that kind of environment, and yet his own life was just so peaceful. He decided when he was really young to become a monk. And during the time that he was a monk and in Vietnam, there were many opportunities when he could have reacted in the way of somebody who's angry. Because how could you not be angry seeing your people being killed and seeing the devastation that was happening in the war? But if he was angry, he didn't act on it. I just recently read a book by Sister Chang Kong, who was his really close collaborator during all the years of his ministry. And when she got angry, she would just do walking meditation. She would just sit with it until she saw her way out of it. And she learned that from Thich Nhat Hanh. So I suspect that that's what he did as well. And they never killed anybody. They never reacted in any way to that kind of anger. It was not easy. They were persecuted. He was exiled. So I don't know. I take from that no, it's never appropriate to take a life, not even your own. Well, that was a long answer to a question. Anything else? Anybody else wants to say? Yes.
I mean, it seems like nature has almost incorporated this killing when it comes to the food chain. You know, animals killing other animals. It seems like nature even has somehow worked that into being something that we understand to be okay. How do you feel about that?
Well, it makes sense. Yeah.
You spoke about us, but in nature it seems to be commonplace.
Yeah. I think it has to do with, of course, animals typically kill just to eat, just to sustain themselves. When an animal kills, and sometimes it's, you know, like a rogue elephant you hear about, you know, that's doing all kinds of destruction. But most of the time, animals kill because it's, you know, to eat. In fact, I don't have any like documentary evidence about this, but what I've read and what I've heard is that our ancestors didn't kill animals unless it was for food. And what they killed, they cooked and pretty much used all of the animal for clothing, for making tools and that sort of thing. So it's been, you know, killing things has been around for a long, long time. But the way of killing that is happening in our world now is very different. And it usually stems from the things that Ty talks about here, from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance. So I guess I'm thinking that when anger or fear, any of these things, when that is the motivation for the killing, then it's even more egregious. We could go off the rails and talk about karma, but I'm not going to do that, I promise. So anyway, in my opinion, it's a very personal decision how you respond to this training and how you implement it in your life. So when we do the 5 mindfulness trainings, if you'd like to take the trainings, you can take one of them, 2 of them, none of them, all of them. It's a very personal decision. Anything else before we move on? Okay, now we can go to true happiness. The true happiness is the second one. I picked this picture because this happened at a retreat at Magnolia Grove, and people just kind of collected on this platform where the bell is, and some people brought instruments. There were a couple of, well, you can see some monks and nuns up there with instruments, and they were just playing music. We were singing. It was truly happy. It was a happy time for all of us. So let's look at what Ty says about, oh, somehow I've lost my picture. Hold on a second. Okay, so true happiness. Who would like to read the first part here? Thank you, Byron.
How long?
Just read that first paragraph.
Aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I am committed to practicing generosity in my thinking, speaking, and acting.
So I think the picture is probably not very easy for you to see or read, but it's a picture of something called the 6 paramitas, which are Buddhist practices that actually will help us to cultivate generosity in thinking, speaking, and acting. I actually have some little bitty cards that I will share with you if you want it. The paramitas are, the 6 categories are dana, which is generosity or giving. The precepts, which are these trainings we're talking about. Mindfulness, which is just what we practice. Let's see, can I read this? Energy. And this is terrible. My little card is very small and I cannot read all of it. Oh, maybe this side. Insight, dana, precepts, inclusiveness, energy, meditation, insight. Those are the things that will help us cultivate this way of thinking. So he gives us that to begin with so that we recognize what the causes of the suffering are and what we can do to change it, what we're committed to do in order to live according to this precept. So, Byron, you want to read the next part?
I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. And I will share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. Oh, sorry.
Let's stop there. So that's pretty easy to understand, I think. And I doubt if we have any thieves in the room today. But here's another part of this that I have learned as I've studied with it for all these years. This part that says not to possess anything that should belong to others. I don't know that I have done that, but I have seen in some places, like as I was teaching, I know it happens sometimes in the corporate world, that people steal somebody else's idea and claim it for themselves. So that's one of the kinds of things that this mindfulness training speaks to. And then here's what we can do: share my time, energy, and material resources with those who are in need. That's sort of what we're doing here. We're sharing our time, we're sharing our energy, we're all sharing our material resources. And the person in need is the meditation center in this case, because we don't exist without your material resources. So, that's one way that this shows up. But you can also think about other organizations maybe that you support, organizations that really do good work and need your support. So sharing your time, energy, and resources with those is a part of this training called True Happiness. Let's go to the next picture. Somebody else want to read?
I'll read it.
Okay.
This whole paragraph here.
Yes.
I will practice looking deeply to see that the happiness and suffering of others are not separate from my own happiness and suffering. That true happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. And that running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair.
So here he's saying that, first of all, we are not separate from one another, which is, we know that. We know about interbeing. We know about interdependence. We've heard lessons on that. We've probably practiced it. We're very familiar with that. So that part is not new to us. The next part might be a little bit, challenging. True happiness is not possible without understanding and compassion. If you think about relationships that you have with one another, whether it's a long-term intimate relationship or just a friendly relationship that's like passing, if there's not some kind of understanding and compassion in that relationship, nobody's going to be happy. So true happiness is not possible without some kind of understanding and compassion. And then he explains that, and this speaks to greed that he's already talked about. Running after wealth, fame, power, and sensual pleasures can bring much suffering and despair. This is about clinging or attaching to something. We can look at people and think, well, they really do seem to be chasing wealth or fame or power. So, I don't know if these people are very happy. If they were happy, maybe they wouldn't have to be chasing something. Any other thoughts about that? What do you think?
I've been bowing in.
Mhm.
I've been thinking about that fame and power and recognition of for a while now, because I just recently was told that I earn half of what a coworker does. And so she's a nurse and I'm an interpreter. And I was thinking, like, I have a master's, she has a bachelor's, that kind of thing. And so I think that's exactly what this refers to, because if I really want to, I can get really upset about it. And I did for a little bit, but then I came to the realization that it's not worth it, because it only leads to more and more frustration and more anger and more resentment. So at this moment, I don't have anything to really complain about my situation. So that really hits the nail on the head. for me.
Great,
How'd that go?
wonderful
Yeah.
example. Thank you so much for sharing. The thing about running after something is there's never a place to stop.
Right.
If you're running, you're gonna keep running. The same thing with seeking or striving. If you're always seeking, you never find, you're just seeking. If you're striving, you never stop to kind of appreciate what you've had. There is a sign when I go home, I go on the access road to get on 75, and there's a sign for a school that says striving something for something. And when I pass that sign, I just say, oh no, don't do that. Change your name. Anyway, but we don't strive, we don't run after things. We prepare a path for things to change. And there are ways to do that. And I think you've done the first step really well. Just let go of it. All right, let's see what's next. I know your paper doesn't match what's up there. Would somebody like to read this? At least the first section. Thank you.
I'm aware that happiness depends on my mental attitude and not on external conditions, that I can live happily in the present moment simply by remembering that I already have more than conditions to be happy.
Right. So that to me says happiness is an inside job. Nobody can make you happy. People can do things that support your happiness, but nobody can make you happy. If you don't want to be happy, you're going to be unhappy. If you want to be happy, you will find ways to elevate your own feelings. But it's an inside job. I can't make you happy. Sorry. What's the next one? Who would read that one? Okay.
I am committed to practicing right livelihood so that I can help reduce the suffering of living beings on earth and stop contributing to climate change.
I'm thinking of a friend of mine in the Sangha who really took to heart this part about practicing right livelihood. She is a writer, an editor, and she was involved in editing, I guess, information that she found to be not quite in alignment with right livelihood. And she actually changed how she changed how she advertised what she does so that it would be more in alignment with what she considers to be right livelihood. I think it's really important to think about the fact that we can be happy if we will look at the conditions that already exist, particularly in this Sangha. We have one another, we support one another, there's harmony here. It's a lovely place to be. And anytime well, for me anyway, anytime I feel a little bit discouraged, I remember to come to Sangha, and then I leave feeling much, much better, because it brings a feeling, a connection within me that brings me happiness. I seem to have run out of cards. I don't think there's another picture. I think we're done. Right? Okay. So there's 15 minutes left, and I'm going to just listen and wait and see if you want to share anything about any of these things I've talked about. I will reserve a few minutes at the end to talk about the ceremony. So I'd like to hear from you.
When there's like there's words that are pushing out or taking some extra time to be there for others on certain days. And those little ways, I feel like make just as big of a difference, if not more, than material donations and such. So I wanted to add that.
Thank you.
All up bowing in. I was thinking that, you know, the anger and the greed and just some of the emotions that come up for people may arise because they don't feel cared for. And that is something that we have to do ourselves, but often it stops us if we're not cared for, to not care for ourselves and then not care for others. So it just is reminding me, you know, that we don't wait to care for someone if someone is not caring for us. So it doesn't matter if we're not getting it, but caring is still so important to give, especially like now. People need caring.
Thank you, Paula.
It's Cornell bowing in. Not really fully formed on the thoughts, so I hope I get there. When we're talking in Reverence for Life again, because some of the questions that came up are those tough questions about those times when is killing justified? Retribution, self-defense. When we're denied oil reserve, is it okay to go to war and kill? Or energy? No, those sort of things. Those are those big questions. But you know, it's very different than me going to have a burger. But what do we do about that? But something that I noticed for me in practicing the mindfulness trainings is I recognize in myself when I start thinking about, well, in this case, was a loss of life justified? The answer is probably no, but I don't know. But it's real interesting that now I think about what is my involvement, how am I connected, or just that the thinking this way gives me an opportunity to come to Sangha and talk about that I have those challenges and there's not a clear answer. And these mindfulness trainings don't give us the answer to,
Right.
Here is this specific situation. What do you say about this? Well, this has been the challenge of millennia of human existence, hasn't it? And what can I do? There was a last statement, which, I've probably read about as many times as you do, Bobbie, but this one, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, non-attachment to views. Well, I can practice that, even though I haven't solved the thing of retribution, self-defense.
Thank you, Connor. And the place you come to, in your understanding, might be very different from the place I come to, or the place any of you come to, because you're following your own guidelines, you're following these guidelines, but in your own way. It's a better way to say that.
There's that, when we do the touching the earth practice, there's a line from one of your things, and it's about the land and the land that we sit on. Now, how many lives were lost on this piece of land? Not meaning to be a downer, but I think it's those things that this mindfulness training makes me think of. I have an advantage. I can be sitting here in air conditioning and all that because of the suffering and payment of lives of those who lived here.
Thank you. I know you guys are thinking, I can see that.
Jake bowing in. Okay, so I haven't figured out exactly how I'm gonna word this, so I really hope I find myself along the way here. But you know, when we talk about, these are more so guidelines as opposed to like a strict rule book.
Right.
So as we've kind of been talking about vegetarianism and stuff like that, you know, my favorite two foods in the world are a cheeseburger and a chicken quesadilla. I don't know if I'm ever really going to be able to change that part of myself, but as we work on these things and as we talk about these things, these guidelines, I think, you know, from what I've learned from talking with other people here, is that for me, the best, I think, what I can do is just kind of steer in a direction. What can I do to reduce the harm to the world, reduce the killing? I heard you speak a minute ago, talk about how animals kill as well as people. So it's really just about what can I do to be more ethical in my decision, in where I get my food source from. You know, sometimes the more ethical decision is going to be spending a few extra dollars on those more expensive eggs at the grocery store, as opposed to, because at least those chickens had a better life, as opposed to the $3 eggs that are more within my budget. But if I want eggs, maybe I should get the ones that at least had a better life. So yeah, I guess my thought is just, it's really whatever we can do to steer in the direction of least amount of harm, least amount of killing. So that's all I really have to add.
Well, I think you're on the right track. Obviously, we can't solve all the world's problems, but we can steer, as you said, toward cultivating these kinds of feelings and ways of action in ourselves. Zita?
At the Italian. Also slowly, not fully worked out. I have not taken the 5 mindfulness trainings, but in a different context, in 2018, I made a commitment to nonviolence in the South when I arrived. And similar themes came out of like, how do I become? I want to speak just for myself. But the thing that happened a lot for me was in talking about decisions that I was making in my life, I found that other people received them with maybe like a little bit of pain, because it felt like for me to look deeply at the ways that I was participating in violence made other people feel maybe that I had expectations of them, things like that. And it made me realize that there's a lot of pain in realizing like how much violence we unnecessarily. And I think that there is, like, we deserve reverence for ourselves and grace to being able to be like to face hiding to choose. Have been trying to like live like have a commitment to there is like a little bit of like pain and discomfort and shifting of my relationships. That's all.
think that's one of the, I don't know, it's one of the consequences, I guess. It's everything we do has some kind of consequence. But on the other side, setting an example that's healthy and beneficial is also a good thing. So, it may be that the people who are uncomfortable will kind of think about, what's been going on. Anyway, it's not a reason to change your perspective, but it's good that you notice that and have compassion for people about it. Well, I don't want to keep you over time, so I'm going to talk about the mindfulness training ceremony right now. This will happen on the 28th. This particular evening Sangha will begin at 6, not 5, so that we can have our Dharma teacher here. So at 6 o'clock, anybody is welcome to come. In fact, I hope you will all come, whether you take the trainings or not, because it's a really beautiful ceremony and something that's been handed down to us since the time of the Buddha. So for more than 2,000 years, people have been doing this ceremony in one form or another. So the setup will be different because there will be a kind of a wide aisle in the middle for the participants who are receiving the training. They will be sitting in the middle, and the rest of us will be sitting on each side, on cushions or chairs. And then everybody will participate in whatever way you feel comfortable. The recipients will do a lot of frustrations, and anyway, it's hard to explain without actually having been a part of one, but it's very moving, and I think it's something that everyone would really, really enjoy. So I hope you'll think about it and be here. If you would like to receive the 5 mindfulness trainings, and we always say receive, but the trainings are actually transmitted. Like things have been transmitted from the Buddha to our other spiritual ancestors, to Thich Nhat Hanh, to us. This energy, it's like a flow of energy that just keeps moving through the centuries until it comes to rest in us, and we're passing it on to somebody else. So this transmission is like that. Our Dharma teacher will transmit the trainings to the people who are receiving them. And anyway, so that's why we call it recipients. And that's why it's called transmitting. I don't know if I said everything I need to say.
If
Yeah.
someone wants to receive them, what do they do?
Oh, I started there, didn't I? There is there's a form online, and if you just go to the website, you can find the form and fill it out. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you.
Yeah, I think probably a good timeline for that is like fill it out a week ahead. I mean, this certain deadline, yes, so fill it out soon. Please don't wait till last minute. We do some things to forget.
Right. In fact, the deadline for signing up is the Wednesday before that Sunday.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what that date is. Might be the 24th. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for being here. And I'm going to stick around a few minutes if you want to ask a question or chat, whatever. So let's close with our closing chant.